Hey there! Welcome to the Flute 360 podcast. I'm Dr. Heidi K. Begay, and I'm a flutist, educator, coach, and podcaster. My God-given mission is to serve you. I am passionate about guiding you, the modern-day flutist, to discover your unique voice on and off the stage. The goal of this podcast is to help you thrive, both as an artist and as a musicpreneur. Go ahead and grab some espresso, your favorite notepad, and let's get to it. Today's episode 185 is titled An Interview with Elizabeth Raum. Hello everyone, welcome back to another Flute 360 podcast episode. This series, being published in January of 2022, is a special treat for me. I get to dive into 6 wonderful conversations with 6 wonderful guests, and we are going to be highlighting their careers and how they have been a pivotal force within our music community. In addition, we are also going to be highlighting a wonderful festival that is going down February 2022 through YouTube. I met a great friend who is a composer and a cellist. His name is Ron Royer, and he and I got together and decided we wanted to co-organize a flute festival. And this flute festival is going to be highlighting amazing composers' works, flutists from across the world, and even better yet, not just any works, but works by women composers. So this is the inspiration behind this Flute 360 series. And without further ado, help me welcome my first guest, Elizabeth Raum, to the show. She is a prolific composer, an oboist, an educator, and I cannot wait to pick her brain. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh my goodness, the pleasure is all mine. And as we were saying pre-recording, I love your magnetic energy. You are so warm and kind, and we are going to have a wonderful time together.
I'm sure we will.
Great. So for those who may not know you, can you share a little bit about yourself?
Well, I always considered myself primarily an oboist until, actually I started oboe when I was 11 years old because the band needed an oboe. I'm sure a lot of musicians out there started because their band needed whatever instrument they played. Before that, I played piano, sort of. My mother was a music educator, and she taught me piano. And then I went to Eastman as an oboe major, and I got a job with my husband at the Atlantic Symphony in Halifax, Nova Scotia. It was a lucky chance that there was a principal oboe and a principal trombone opening. He's a trombonist. We both got the jobs, so we played in an orchestra together. As the time went on, we had 2 children by the time we went up there, and then I had a third when I was up there. And I just felt like I just couldn't continue. We did a lot of touring with a family like that. I felt like babysitters were bringing the kids up. So I resigned, and he got a job teaching at the University of Regina in Saskatchewan, which worked out really well. As it turned out, they needed an oboe in the orchestra there. So I ended up playing in the Regina Symphony, which is quite a good orchestra. It's on my recordings of my violin concerto, horn concerto, and violin and viola concerto called Elizabeth Raum, the Concertos of Elizabeth Raum, Myth, Legend, Romance. Anyhow, but when I went there, that left a big hole in my life because I had gone from being a full-time oboist to the Regina Symphony's a part-time orchestra. So I needed something else. You had mentioned about women role models. And at that time, this is 1975, there were very few women as composers that anyone ever heard of. Orchestras didn't play their music. Nobody really played their music. So I never thought of writing music. but I did think I could write words. So the composition teacher in Regina, his dream was to write songs. He wanted to go to Nashville. So we collaborated on what we called was Schutel and Raum hits. His name was Thomas Schutel, Dr. Thomas Schutel, and he would write music and I would write the words. We had them recorded. He took them to Nashville and they didn't go anywhere. So then we thought, okay, let's try an opera because that's more our field. So I wrote a libretto called The Final Bid about a bridge game. And it was perfect, SATB. You have 4 players. I gave him a libretto and a year went by and he didn't attempt to write the opera. And I said, well, what are you going to do? And he said, why don't you write it? I thought, me, write it, compose? And, I thought I might as well give it a try. I took one of the arias and I started writing and it came quite easily. And I thought, is this all there is to composing? Is you write what you want to hear? Because somehow before that, I don't know what I thought it was, but it seemed so utterly mysterious that it came from the heavens or came whatever, and only to a select few. And then I found out, no, it's just something. How do you phrase your music? It's the same kind of thing. Yeah. You can try to teach someone how to phrase, put a crescendo there, or do whatever, all the things that I'm sure you do with your flute students. Yeah. And some just do it. You don't have to tell them.
Right.
They just do it. And it's the same with the composing. You can teach a person how to compose. That's why Nadia Boulanger said you can't teach composition. She would teach theory, which is perhaps more important. That's why Bach is the basis of so much theory. And that's why many composers consider Bach the greatest composer, because he knew how to put all these elements of music together into something that sounded wonderful. So that's how I started. I continued from that first aria and I wrote the whole opera. The University of Regina produced it and CBC recorded it. And that was it. There was no looking back. I couldn't wait to start composing in the morning. The kids would go off to school. My husband would go off to the university and I'd start composing. And that's really how it all started.
That's amazing. Are you kind of surprised by how it unfolded for you?
Yes, I am. I never thought in my youth, although in my youth, I used to write things all the time, but I didn't take them seriously, because as I said, I didn't I thought composers were all old, dead men. and that's as far as it went with me.
Yeah.
But yes, I was quite surprised. It's even a bigger surprise. In addition to writing for flute and operas and whatnot, my biggest outlet is writing for tuba. I write a lot of music for tuba. And that was because we had a world-class tuba player in Regina. He played all over the world. And when he came to my first opera, he was one of the few, I hate to say it, few of my friends that went to the first opera. And he loved it. And he started to pester me about writing for the tuba. Well, I never thought of, I couldn't think what to do for the tuba. But then when I heard him play, it was like a bass baritone. It's a beautiful instrument. Yeah. But mostly what you hear is in the back of the orchestra. But no, he was a wonderful tuba player. And then CBC asked for a commission, and he said, why don't you write a tuba concerto, which I did. I wrote The Legend of Heimdall, and that was recorded as well. So that's kind of, and then, there was no looking back.
That's amazing. Going back to the little nugget you displayed earlier, you said that, the music and composing, you thought that composition was just for the select few.
Yeah.
In our email correspondences, you said that the orchestra and being an oboist in an orchestra was your greatest teacher with instrumentation. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, I'm an oboist.
Yeah.
So I have the strings in front of me. the brass and percussion behind me, the woodwinds all around me. And I sit right next to the flute. So, and there is so much music that flute and oboe play in octaves quite often. I love that sound. I also like the switch, have the oboe an octave higher and the flute low. It's a very, very interesting sound. But that's really also, my husband plays trombone, so I have a brass mentor. My daughter is a violinist. She's one of Canada's top violinists. So I have a string. My sister is also a violinist. And my other daughter played percussion. So there you have it.
Wow. It was right there in front of you.
Yeah. And the other really helpful thing was that I played in a chamber ensemble, the Regina Symphony Chamber Players, which was a woodwind quintet, string quintet, and trumpet. And so I was able to, I would write something and I'd take like the clarinet part to the clarinet player and say, is this comfortable? And he would say, no, you're over the break too much or whatever. And I'd change it a little bit and I'd say, how's that? Perfect. So I could get the same sound, but have it easy to play. And I was able to do that with all the instruments. And, you reach a point where you kind of sense what is right or wrong, but I still always go to the musician and ask them.
Yes, that's very smart.
Yeah. If you want your music played.
Yeah, exactly. So again, I'm just really fascinated by, how you got into composing and your compositional career. So kind of going back to where it all began, you said you started composing around 1979?
Yeah.
Okay. So there were not a lot of female composers to mentor you during this time. So my curiosity is, what would it have meant to you if you had a female composer as a mentor in your life during that time?
I don't think it would have mattered at all.
Okay.
I in fact, if anything, I feel like I was able to develop in my own way because there was nobody. I think there's a lot of pressure for young composers to write in a certain style, a style that's acceptable by the granting agencies, modern, avant-garde. They almost feel like they're being heroic in writing that way. And I don't. I'm really a traditional writer. I much prefer that. I like the elements of avant-garde if it means something at that moment. Like I wrote The Garden of Alice was my second opera, which, by the way, has just been filmed by Pacific Opera Victoria and will be released soon. But I used a tone row in that to designate the Queen of Hearts, who seems to be crazy, but she's in charge. A tone row is, in a way, can be considered that way. But a lot of people would not recognize it as a tone row. I cheat a little bit. I always want things to sound good.
Okay, sure. And I'm sure that there are more elements to this question, but this piggybacks off nicely into my next question. And that is, what is your overarching mission as a composer?
Get my music played and heard.
Yeah.
That's about it. That's all. It's also, it's funny. It's also like some people like video games, and you have to get to a certain destination. You have to go through all these problems. I sometimes think of composing as the same way. I need to get into that key because it's, saxophones is the worst thing to write for, because if everyone else is comfortable, they're in a horrible key. You have to be so careful about where you write. So I need to get into a key. How am I going to get there? What kind of modulations am I going to use that are convincing? There's an awful lot of that. How can I'll get a very vague notion of what I want. Now, how can I execute that in a way that someone can play it? Again, it's a puzzle. And I start working on it. And the next day, usually I'll write something. I say, I don't care, I'm going to write it. The next day I come back and I know what has to be changed, because I had time to sleep on it and I know it has to be fixed. So it is. It's a little, to me, it's like playing video games might be for someone else. I never played. I only played a little bit when my grandchildren were little, and they were very simple games.
That is so cool. I've never heard a composer correspond that to video games and using that analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, very neat. So sitting in the orchestra as an oboist for many, many years, and you said you sat next to flutists, right?
Yes. Yeah.
What, as you compose for the flute, how do you perceive the flute voice?
A soprano coloratura.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the reason why I asked that is because some composers that I've interviewed in the past, they will say, "Oh, the flute voice, uh, it should float. I hear it as a floating voice." Um, and
Huh.
of course, it depends on the style that you're composing in,
Yeah.
correct? But it's just interesting to hear how they perceive the flute and what they want to portray through that instrument, based on the timbre.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I didn't know if you had a specific idea in mind for, that
No,
instrument.
just flute, because I'm sitting next to flute players,
Yeah.
so I don't
Yeah.
want them to sound like anything other than flute. One of
Mhm.
my biggest influence for orchestration is Brahms. The way he
Okay.
uses the flute and the oboe, don't you think it's so
Ooh,
beautiful? The flute and the
yes.
oboe together.
Ooh, I love that example.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Whenever
love that.
when I play Brahms, I feel so close to the flute player.
Nice. Beautiful. So, kind of bringing everything back full circle to the beginning of this episode, where I mentioned the SPO, the Scarborough
Oh
Philharmonic
yeah.
Orchestra, and their February 2022 festival. The co-host of this festival is Ron Royer, our mutual friend.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, like, how did Ron come into your life? What is your relationship like? What is your association with the SPO?
I played as an extra a couple times with the Scarborough Philharmonic Orchestra,
Mm,
and I also played even more with his wife, Kay. She's a wonderful clarinet player.
mm,
I've written several things for her, and I love her playing. And then one thing led to another. Ron is an incredible person. He's
mm,
such a generous person.
mm,
He always seems to want to help other people. He gets these ideas, and then he came to your conference, and he
mm,
executes them. He works on what he's going to do. And he has a competition every year for young emerging composers. And he asked me at one point if I would adjudicate and there were a lot of entries. And then you adjudicate, and then you mentor that
mm.
one of the winners. There'd be 4 or 5 winners. So that was the first thing. I've done that for several years. Then he asked me if I would be the composer in residence. This was 1920. He
Mm,
asked me to be composer in residence. And that, unfortunately, is when the COVID started.
mm,
So that was a little difficult. I had written several things for his wife, Kay, with strings.
mm,
She was playing with a string trio and clarinet. And she did, actually, you can go on YouTube and find one. It's called Searching for Sophia.
mm,
You can see her playing with a string trio there. I wrote a piece when I was composer in residence for Septet called Wascana Park. You can also go online and see that. And it's like a clarinet feature again.
mm.
But that is the main, how I met Ron. We also played a few jobs together. And I don't have a car here in Toronto. I used to, when I was in Saskatchewan, it was fine, but I don't know. I got to Toronto, and you get the TTC. So I took a lot of trips with Ron and Kay. Ron has so many stories,
Yes,
so
he
many
does.
stories. Yeah. And so it was fascinating. So all of these things are the way I got to know Ron. He also worked with the Oden String Quartet. They just released quartet CD called Journey Through the Night.
Mm,
And that's the music. My piece is on there, his music, all various composers. He brings these people together.
yeah.
He's released several CDs, and
Mm,
he just seems to know everything. He has a background in Hollywood
mhm,
recording, which he'll probably talk to you about later. But
mm,
his whole family was in Los Angeles, doing recordings and playing in the orchestras there. So
yeah. When I talk with Ron, and as we have been co-organizing this festival, I look at him and we can talk hours
yeah,
about his stories. And there have been hours where I just sit back and I listen. And
yeah,
afterwards, I'm like, man, I wish that was recorded so that way I can digest it even more later, just for my own personal use.
yeah.
Because his stories about Bartok and Berlioz and Wagner, it's extraordinary.
It is. Yeah,
I've learned a lot from him.
and he has an amazing memory. He remembers everything.
No, I love it. We need people like Ron in our lives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of other compositions and new CDs coming out, you have two new latest works titled Northern Lights and The Bridal Veil Falls for
Yes.
flute.
Yeah.
Would you want to talk about those pieces?
Well, that's another flute player. Jay Marsh is her name, and she has this has been a dream of hers for years, to make a flute CD. And she also is kind of loves nature. She has a cottage up north, and she wanted something that expressed nature. So everyone on the CD has written something that, well, Northern Lights, that's nature. Northern Lights, I originally wrote for tape in the old days, and flute. And for Jane Schudel. Jane Schudel is the wife of the guy that I did Schudel and Raum hits with. And I wrote all my flute music for her. And so this was with tape and flute and dancers. Then when Jay was going to make her CD, she asked me if I had something just for flute, because she had to do an audition tape. And I said, well, I have this. I sent her the information. I sent her the recording. But she wanted harp. She wanted to do it with harp. And she got the harp player from the Toronto Symphony to play with her. So I had to rewrite the tape part. I ended up doing it for tape, harp, and percussion. And not tape, flute, harp, and percussion. And it turned out really well. She wants to take this on tour. The other piece on the recording was, since she wanted something about the Algonquin area up north of Toronto. And so the Bridal Veil Falls are there. So I picked that, and I picked scenes from the Bridal Veil Falls. Like one of the movements is called Porcupines. It's kind of comical. It's for flute, bassoon, and harp.
Okay.
And once again, she wants to bring this on tour in all these little towns up there. That was her dream, to do that. So she's done it. She hasn't started the touring yet because we can't, but she's made the CD. She just finished it, and I sent you the cover. And it's once again, no looking back.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So as a follow-up question, I'm curious, here you're talking about collaborating with other like-minded musicians, right? And composing and having these musicians perform the piece on tours. And then what you mentioned earlier about one of Ron's strengths, bringing people together. This is something that I have been voicing frequently throughout my show, of saying, get yourself out there, bring people into your orbit, ask if so-and-so would be on said project, because we cannot do it alone, right?
Yeah.
And as a composer, you know this.
Yes.
You need instruments to play
For
your
sure.
music.
Yeah.
So if there is a musician right now listening to this and they're just like, oh, I have this idea, I'm too scared to, bring those people into my orbit, I don't know how to network, I don't know how to go about collaborations, what is the main tip that you would advise to said person?
Well, I'm not, what do they call it? Social media. I'm not very social media savvy, but I would think that would be the first step. Facebook, for instance. I have a lot of tuba Facebook friends, and flutes as well. But whenever someone asks to be my friend, I accept the tuba player. And then I send them a list of my tuba works.
Hmm.
And that it's one way to get your music out there. Now, if you wanted to do something, I know on Facebook there are a lot of groups, and you can join a group, you can start a group. I'm not sure how. You'd have to look it up. I don't know anything about TikTok, but I know that the kids, my grandchildren, in fact, right now they're just going back to school, and one of the things that they're doing is learning social media.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
that would be a start, I would think.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. But speaking specifically, like in your world, how do you bring people into your orbit? Because you said Ron does a very good job of it, and you
Yeah.
are a shining example of it as well. I mean, look at how many pieces that you have put out, that have been performed, that have been produced, right? So are you just noticing that people like in-person activities, like when somebody comes into your world, then you just ask, right? I mean, how does that conversation come up? Because I think a lot of times musicians are just stuck. They don't want to put themselves out there. They're afraid of rejection sometimes. And I'm just kind of curious, like what your process looks like.
Well, when I was in Regina, that's a small city.
Mm,
And so I knew all the musicians. And
mm,
I started a few things. I started the Contemporary Directions Ensemble way back when I first went there.
mm,
And then later, the Prairie Festival of New Music.
mm,
And so I could talk to people directly. I worked with the university. I worked with the Regina Symphony. So that wasn't so hard because I knew everyone personally.
mm.
I don't know what I would do in Toronto. I've
Okay.
been here 10 years. However, I have a friend who started a group called the Untitled Ensemble,
Mm,
which I can use to demonstrate what she did.
mm,
She wrote all of her friends who were musicians and said, I want to start this group. And she calls it Untitled because it's whatever is going to happen at the time.
mm,
Different people playing, depends on the orchestration. She does try to do keep it diverse.
mm,
So that helps, especially helps with grants. And she's
mm,
gotten several grants, which is nice. But during COVID, we had to play outside. She would put together a program and say, can you make this concert? And if we could, then, and she needed that instrumentation, we did. For instance, I did a piece with her for two oboes, oboe, English horn, and piano.
mm,
And whatever group could come together, we set up a rehearsal schedule and we did put together the concert. She found places that we could play. Keep in mind, this is during the summer.
mm.
Although it poured one time, we went inside. We had the sound man out there. He had to quickly, everybody grabbed something and ran inside. But she started that just by contacting everybody.
Yep.
And
Reaching
if you're
out.
interested, she had one meeting. She said, if you're interested, come. And we did.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. It
I
can
think
really
that
be
would,
that simple.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how else you could do it other than
Yeah.
these days with the internet, you can do anything.
Oh, for sure. Yes. And it's really just me picking your brain just to showcase to people like, you know, using your story as a piece of encouragement, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's in person or virtual, look, it can happen if you, and you mentioned something earlier that you nailed it right on the head and you said, well, it was easier when I knew the people, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, what I'm hearing is you have to build those relationships.
You
If you
do.
have relationships in your life, then it's easy to scale it and to say, oh, let's actually do this together. And then projects
Yeah.
are formed.
I have another thought is if you live in a place like Toronto with all these universities, go to the music departments.
Yep.
Just put a sign up on the thing and get students, because there
Yeah.
are a lot of students would love to play.
Oh,
And if you're for finding places to play there, even if you can't get a full concert or a concert hall, there are a lot of churches that you can use. Old folks' homes,
mhm.
they love it when you come and play. We used to do that when I went to Eastman. We played in the senior citizens' homes.
Okay.
And they just loved it when we came. The sorority would put together a concert and go play. And it gave us the practice to play. Usually they had a piano in there. So that was something. The Regina Symphony, we used to play in senior citizens' homes there too, and they loved it.
Oh, so smart.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. What I'm hearing is be resourceful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my
People want to
goodness.
hear you. People do
Yep.
want to hear you if you can organize something.
I love that.
You know,
Yes.
another thing is my daughter and her, the family, they all play. My daughter's a top violinist and pianist. Her husband teaches composition at Western Ontario, University of Western Ontario, and in his youth played in a rock band. He played the bass, electric bass. Her two sons, she had triplets, and the twins, the two boys, are top musicians. They're 12 years old, but they it's incredible how well they play. And then the two daughters, the triplet daughter sings, and the other daughter plays guitar and sings. So they do porch concerts all summer because, you know, you couldn't do anything with COVID.
Yeah.
The father is sound man. He that's one of the things he does. He produces CDs, among other things. He teaches that kind of thing at Western. So they have all this equipment, and they play on their porch. They pull everything out. They play. The one boy plays drums as well as keyboards, and they give these concerts, and it's packed.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and actually during this period, a lot of other people were giving porch concerts.
Yes.
And then you either put out the hat if you want. They didn't do that, but a lot of people did, professional musicians.
Yeah. There's a flutist out east, and her name is Mimi Stillman. And I saw her through Facebook do a lot of porch concerts.
Yeah.
Very neat. So as we are wrapping up this wonderful conversation, do you have any last sentiments that you would like to offer?
Oh gosh, let's get through this COVID thing.
Yeah, there you
but
go.
At the same time, I can't help thinking that it's opened up. You know, it's a change. It's like, you know, when you go through your life and there's something you think, oh my God, this is a disaster. And somehow you come out of it and the other side stronger. Yeah. It's allowed you to make changes that you never would have bothered to make before. And I do feel like that the COVID thing has changed so much. I am now watching the Toronto Symphony. I have one of those great big screens, you know, and I can cast from the computer down to the screen, and they film it. They film these things, and sometimes they do a green screen behind it, you know, so you have the scene where they're playing. And that's something that you never would have had. I don't think it would have been kicked into action, but for the COVID. So there are some positive things that have come out of it.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
From ashes comes beauty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The phoenix.
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, like for me, not to talk anyone's ear off, but, you know, my podcast, being able to talk with people from around the world and hearing their phenomenal stories. It's like, would I have had time to do that and to connect with musicians across the globe? Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? But I'm so glad it happened that way, because now I have new friends like you, Elizabeth, and we can stay in touch and we can see where the relationship goes. And to me, that's a huge blessing.
Oh, it is. It is for sure. Yeah. You know, that's another blessing is I can go to the Regina Symphony concerts now. They stream them. So I couldn't go before. My friends would be playing and I couldn't see it. Now I can.
Nice.
Yeah, because they stream everything.
Oh, how nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for your time and expertise. It's been wonderful getting to know you, and I cannot wait to listen to the CD Flute in the Wild that you were so generous to share with me.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to today's content. If you wouldn't mind sharing this episode or another episode through the Flute 360 podcast with one of your music friends, I would be so appreciative. Thank you. let's talk about flute.